When I closed the apartment door behind me that evening, I thought the moment at the stoplight was something I could just tuck away. A passing slip, a flicker of something that didn't belong to me. I told myself I'd let it fade. But the truth was, it didn't fade at all. The image of Daniel's hand brushing mine, the weight of his words, "You deserve to feel noticed," kept looping in my mind, playing over the mundane rhythm of the rest of my evening. I went through the motions, pouring tea, reheating leftovers, folding laundry, but none of it grounded me. It was as if that one instant in the car had stretched beyond its place in time, claiming a space inside me that I hadn't realized was empty. I didn't expect to hear from him again. Not that day. Maybe not for weeks. But less than an hour after I'd gotten home, my phone buzzed with a text. "Daniel, didn't mean to make things uncomfortable." I stared at it for a long moment. It was almost laughable, the idea that this was all about comfort. That was the last word I'd used to describe what I'd felt. Before I could decide whether to respond, another message followed. "Daniel, I just hope you know I meant it." The air in my kitchen seemed to thicken. I set my phone down on the counter, pacing once before picking it back up. I typed out, "I know, but you shouldn't have said it." I deleted it, wrote something else. "We probably shouldn't be having this conversation." Deleted that too. Finally, I settled on, "It's fine. Let's just forget it." I sent it. No dots appeared. No reply. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. And maybe, deep down, that's what I wanted, no lingering threads to tempt me. But the silence that followed didn't feel like closure. It felt like the pause between two movements of a song. Hours later, my husband came home, distracted as ever, scrolling through something on his phone as he dropped his keys in the bowl by the door. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, his lips cool, his attention already miles away. "How was lunch?" he asked without looking up. "It was fine," I said, my voice even. He nodded, muttering something about Daniel saving him from a last minute crisis at work. My chest tightened. Saving him, I thought. That's what Daniel had been doing in his mind. And maybe that was true for him. But for me, it had been something entirely different. 2 days later, the surprise came. It was raining. That morning, the kind of slow, steady drizzle that made the city seem softer, almost blurred around the edges. I had just finished my grocery shopping when I saw him. Daniel. He was leaning against his car near the curb, hands in his pockets, jacket collar turned up against the rain. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of some cinematic moment, casual, but deliberate, like he'd been waiting for me. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, but then he straightened, pushing off the car and walking toward me. "You shouldn't be here," I said before I could stop myself. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I wanted to see you." His voice was calm, but there was something steady and purposeful in his eyes. I glanced around, my heart pounding, not because I feared someone might see us, but because I wasn't sure what I'd do if they did. "Daniel, whatever happened the other day?" He cut me off gently. "It wasn't an accident." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You're married to your job with him. You're his friend. I'm his colleague," he corrected softly. "And I'm also a man who notices things he doesn't seem to." I shook my head, willing myself to step back, to create space. But instead, I stood rooted there in the rain, my bag of groceries suddenly heavy in my hands. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally, the question sharper than I'd meant it to be. He didn't flinch. "Nothing you're not willing to give." It should have been easy to end it there, to walk away, let the rain wash this moment into nothing. But instead, He took one step closer, closing the space between us until I could feel the heat of him, even through the damp air. "I wanted to see if you'd look at me the same way you did at that stoplight," he said. And here was the surprise. I did. I had told myself it was a moment born out of stillness, of circumstance, that if we were anywhere less intimate than a car paused in traffic, it wouldn't have happened. But standing here, with the rain soaking into the cuffs of my coat, and his eyes holding mine like they had that day, I knew I'd been lying to myself. I was looking at him the same way. Maybe even more so, Dot. And then, to my absolute shock, he didn't touch me, didn't lean in, didn't turn this into something physical. Instead, he stepped back. "That's all I needed to know," he said quietly. "I'll see you around." And just like that, he was gone, walking back to his car, driving away, leaving me standing there in the rain with my heart racing and my groceries getting wetter by the second. Stood there for a long time afterward, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't rejection, not exactly. It was as if he'd tested something, confirmed it, and decided that was enough. That was the real surprise. Not his touch at the stoplight, not his sudden appearance in the rain, but the fact that he could pull me to the edge of something, and then walk away from it, Dot. It left me wondering what game he was playing, and why I felt like I'd already lost, even though nothing had actually happened. When I finally walked home, every step echoed with a question I couldn't shake. Was he finished with me now, or had he just begun? The city rolled past us in a steady blur of colour and motion, but my mind was anything but still. The hum of the engine, the low murmur of jazz from the speakers, and the faint, almost intoxicating scent of his cologne, all of it wrapped around me like a quiet trap I hadn't realized. I'd walked into Daniel drove with the kind of confidence that made you feel he was in control, not just of the car, but of the entire situation. One hand rested easily on the steering wheel, the other occasionally adjusting the gear shift with an almost lazy precision. I found myself stealing glances at him, how the late afternoon light caught in his hair, the sharp line of his jaw when he concentrated on the road. Dot. It was only a short drive, but every minute seemed to stretch. He wasn't just making conversation anymore. He was making me aware. We hit a stretch of traffic as we reached the edge of downtown, the kind that slowed everything to a crawl. The car rolled forward, then stopped. Rolled again, stopped. I told myself to check my phone, to distract myself, but my fingers stayed still on my lap. And then, we reached it. The stoplight. Dot. It wasn't just any stoplight. It was the kind that seemed to take an eternity to change. The kind that made the air between you suddenly feel too thick, too heavy. We pulled to a gentle halt, and for the first time since we'd left the curb, there was complete stillness. No movement, no distraction, just him and me. I turned my head slightly, meaning only to glance at him, but he was already looking at me. Not in that casual, friendly way people do while talking, but in a way that felt searching. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was low, even, but there was something in it, something that told me this wasn't going to be about work, or the weather, or traffic. I hesitated. "Sure." His eyes didn't leave mine. "Are you happy?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples went through me instantly. Dot. It was the kind of question that sounded simple on the surface, but coming from him here, now it was loaded, dangerous. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice weaker than I'd intended. "I think you do," he replied quietly. "You and he. You don't seem like you used to. At least, not from where I'm standing." I felt my chest tighten, partly from his words and partly from the fact that he had noticed, that someone outside my marriage had seen the cracks. I'd been trying to pretend weren't there. That's not really something I should discuss with my husband's colleague, I said finally, forcing my gaze toward the red light ahead of us. But Daniel didn't look away. Maybe not. But maybe it's something you should discuss with someone. Anyone. The way he said it made my stomach flip. I could feel the pull in his voice, not just concern, but curiosity. Something else. The stoplight timer ticked down in my peripheral vision, but it felt irrelevant. The world beyond the car was fading, replaced by the pulse of my own thoughts and the weight of his eyes on me. And then, without warning, he reached out. It wasn't much. Just the lightest touch on my hand resting in my lap. But it was enough to send a jolt through me, a hot rush of awareness that went straight to the place I'd been ignoring for far too long. I didn't pull away immediately. That was the problem. For a split second, I let it happen. I let myself feel it. The warmth of his skin, the quiet pressure of his fingers, the unspoken thing that passed between us in that charged silence. I told myself it could have been innocent. A friendly gesture. But the truth was, nothing about it felt innocent. Daniel, I finally said, my voice a whisper that wasn't nearly as firm as I'd wanted it to be. He leaned back slightly, withdrawing his hand but not his gaze. You deserve to feel noticed, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. Before I could even begin to respond, the light turned green. The car moved forward, and the moment, whatever it had been, slipped just enough to breathe again. But it wasn't gone. The air still hummed with it. My pulse still beat too fast. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he'd just been kind, that I'd misread the intent. But deep down, I knew better. That single touch had been a line crossed. The rest of the drive was quieter, but not in the comfortable way it had been before. Every second felt like something unspoken was sitting between us, demanding to be acknowledged. When he finally pulled up outside my building, I fumbled for the door handle faster than I needed to. Thank you for the ride, I said, keeping my eyes on the street instead of on him. He didn't push. He didn't say anything else. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt his gaze follow me, steady, deliberate, as if he knew something had shifted between us. And he was right. I walked up the steps to my apartment, my keys trembling faintly in my hand, knowing that a simple drive had just turned into something much more complicated. And it had all started at a stoplight. It started off as nothing more than a small favor. At least, that's what I told myself at the time. I didn't think twice when Daniel, my husband's colleague, offered me a ride home. It was supposed to be quick, convenient, and harmless. Just one adult helping another out. But deep down, even in that first moment, there was something about it that felt different. The day had been long and exhausting. I'd gone into the city to meet my husband for a late lunch near his office. Something we rarely had the chance to do these days. Lately he'd been buried in deadlines and late-night meetings, his attention consumed by endless projects. The kind of projects that, according to him, only people like Daniel could handle. I'd heard about Daniel plenty of times before. He was the man my husband praised most often, quick-thinking, resourceful, charming when it counted. My husband always spoke of him with a mix of respect and envy, which told me more than he realized. That afternoon, our lunch had run a little longer than planned, and when my husband's phone buzzed halfway through his coffee, I could see the tension instantly tighten his jaw. It's Daniel, he muttered, glancing at the screen. We've got a situation back at the office. I need to go. The disappointment in me was small but noticeable. This lunch had been my attempt to reconnect, to remind us both that marriage was more than shared bills and passing each other in the hallway at night. But I knew better than to complain, especially when his work was calling. I stood outside his office building as he hurried away. Already on the phone with Daniel, I watched him disappear into the revolving glass doors, feeling strangely invisible among the mid-afternoon crowd. The plan had been to catch a cab back home, but the street was unusually busy, and every passing car seemed to already have passengers. I had just started scrolling through my phone for a ride service, when a familiar voice called my name. "Hey, need a lift?" I looked up to see him. Daniel standing by a sleek, dark sedan parked at the curb. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly tousled, like he'd just come from an intense meeting. His smile was easy, but there was something sharper behind it. "Oh, I don't want to trouble you," I said automatically. "It's no trouble," he replied without hesitation. "Your husband told me you were here. I'm heading in your direction. Anyway, hop in." There was no logical reason to refuse. He was right, it made sense. But the thought of sitting alone in a car with Daniel, the man my husband often called the most charming person in the room, gave me a flicker of hesitation. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. It was that I didn't trust the way I might feel around him. Still, practicality won out. "Okay, thanks," I said, walking toward the passenger side. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed the subtle difference between Daniel and my husband, not in the obvious ways, but in the details. My husband's car was neat, functional, with little personal touch. Daniel's, however, had that faint, warm scent of leather mixed with something darker, his cologne. Maybe that clung to the air. The seat was adjusted comfortably, the radio tuned to soft, low jazz that instantly made the atmosphere feel intimate. As we pulled away from the curb, I tried to make polite conversation. "Busy day for you?" "Always," he said, glancing at me briefly before turning his eyes back to the road. "But it's never too busy for a little detour." "Your husband sounded rushed. Thought I'd make sure you got home safe." There was a subtle emphasis on the word safe, and it made something in my chest tighten. I couldn't tell if it was reassurance or a challenge. The first few minutes were easy enough surface-level small talk about the city traffic, the weather, the never-ending demands of their work. But I was painfully aware of how close we were in that quiet space. Every now and then, I'd catch the faintest side glance from him, as though he was studying me between the lines of conversation. I told myself not to read into it, but then he asked something unexpected. "So, do you come into the city often to see him?" His tone was casual, but his words carried more weight than I expected. "Not really," I admitted. "We don't get much time these days. He's busy." Daniel gave a short, almost knowing laugh. "Yeah, he is." That pause hung in the air. I turned my head to look at him fully, trying to read his expression. "What's that supposed to mean?" He kept his eyes forward, but there was the slightest curve of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Just that. He has a lot on his plate. Sometimes people forget what's right in front of them." The words felt heavier than the moment allowed. I looked out the window, telling myself not to think too much of it. But I could feel something shifting, something I hadn't planned for. I had known Daniel only through my husband's perspective, a capable, reliable co-worker. But here, with just the two of us, I was starting to see the man behind the polished reputation. His voice was deeper when he wasn't speaking across a meeting table. His manner was calmer, more deliberate, and the way he glanced at me, quick but meaningful, was nothing like the polite nods we'd exchanged at office parties. Halfway through the drive, I realized I was sitting differently, straighter, more aware of myself, of the way my hands rested in my lap, of how my hair fell over my shoulder. I hated the idea that I might be trying, even unconsciously, to be noticed. I thought about my husband again, how Over the past months, his attention had been elsewhere. I told myself it was just work, that the late nights and distracted glances were temporary. But sitting next to Daniel, hearing the ease in his voice, I couldn't help but feel the sharp contrast. The city streets passed by in a blur, but the air inside the car was thick with unspoken things. I didn't realize it yet, but agreeing to that ride wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was the first step into a space where lines could blur, where the safety of routine could crack just enough to let something dangerous slip through. And somewhere deep inside, I knew it.